A multi-billion-dollar criminal empire didn't fall because of a federal raid. Not a government informant. Not a decade of undercover work. Not satellites, not wiretaps, not the best forensic accountants the DEA could put in a room. It fell because of a bouquet of flowers. That's the part nobody could believe. Not the investigators who had been chasing this man for 11 years. Not the rival cartel that had spent 3 years trying to find him. Not even the people inside the empire, the ones who called their boss untouchable. A ghost dressed in silk. A man so careful he had become almost mythological. But every myth has a weakness. His was beauty. His real name was Esteban Vargas Delgado. But nobody in the underworld used that name. They called him El Jardinero, the gardener. Not because he was gentle. Because he knew how to make things disappear quietly into the earth and never come back up. For 11 years, Esteban ran one of the most sophisticated criminal networks the Western Hemisphere had ever seen. At its peak, product moving through 7 countries. Money laundered through 14. An estimated 3,000 people on the payroll. Border runners, couriers, lawyers, bankers, elected officials who never asked questions as long as the deposits arrived on time. Interpol had a file on him thick enough to stop a bullet. The DEA had a dedicated task force, 17 active agents, 1 assignment: find him. 3 rival cartels had put contracts on his life, contracts so large that entire networks of bounty hunters restructured just to chase the lead. Nobody found him. Because Esteban hadn't just gotten lucky. He had built invisibility into the architecture of his empire, the way a good engineer builds stability into a bridge. It wasn't an afterthought. It was the foundation. He never used the same safe house twice in a calendar year. Never communicated through digital channels. His orders moved through layers of intermediaries, each one knowing only the piece they needed. Nobody knew enough to betray him. That was the design. No social media, no digital footprint, no verifiable address in any database on Earth. His face hadn't appeared in a clear photograph since a blurry image caught by a hotel lobby camera, a photograph his lawyers spent 2 years arguing was inadmissible even in theory. He had said it once to a senior lieutenant, and the words became cartel legend. The only man who cannot betray you is a man who knows nothing worth saying. He was not cruel for pleasure, he was surgical. Every decision calculated, every exposure accounted for, every variable that could be controlled. Except one. Esteban Vargas Delgado loved flowers. Not casually, not the way a man buys roses for a dinner table. The way other men love control itself, with obsession, with precision, with a need for things to be exactly right or not at all. His estates had elaborate gardens. His rooms always held fresh arrangements, changed twice a week, sourced with specificity. He could tell the difference between a stargazer lily and a Casablanca by scent alone. He could identify an orchid's growing conditions by the color of its leaves. People inside the organization knew about this quirk. Nobody treated it as a weakness. Just another piece of the man's precise personality, a billionaire's eccentric pleasure. What they didn't understand, what Esteban himself never calculated, was this. In a world where every digital trail had been sanitized and every human connection had been rationed, this one physical obsession was the only honest thing left about him. And honest things in the wrong hands are always dangerous. The crack in the armor. The death that started everything was not Esteban's. It was his mother's. Rosa Maria Vargas died on a Tuesday in late January. quietly in her sleep, 79 years old. She had spent the last decade in protected anonymity, moved between addresses in 3 countries, surrounded by Esteban's people. In her final years, she had dementia. She didn't always recognize the son who visited her in disguise. He came anyway, regularly, because that was one of the very few things about Esteban Vargas that was genuinely human. In the underworld, grief is a luxury most men at his level cannot afford. You feel it privately, you manage it quickly, you move forward. Emotion is a door that weakness can walk through. Esteban knew this, he had lived by it. But Rosa Maria was different. She was the one person in the world he had never been strategic about. She was the beginning of him. And when she was gone, something in his extraordinary discipline cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. He decided the funeral would be beautiful. Not public, of course not. Closed compound, controlled guest list, fewer than 15 people. All security protocols in place. Nobody outside his inner circle would know it was happening. That part was still Esteban. But then came the flowers. His mother had loved white lilies. Pure white, full bloom, the kind that smelled like something between a church and a garden in rain. As a boy in Cali, he remembered her cutting them from a neighbor's yard, filling the small house with a scent that meant safety to him. He hadn't thought about that smell in 30 years. When it came back to him in the days after her death, it came back with a weight he didn't expect. He wanted white lilies at the funeral. Not just any white lilies. He wanted Lilium candidum, the Madonna lily, the original. An ancient species, increasingly rare in commercial cultivation. Most florists had replaced it with cheaper hybrids because the genuine article was difficult to grow, temperamental to transport, and almost impossible to source outside specialist growers in southern France and the Italian hill regions. He made the demand through his usual channels. One lieutenant passed it to another. Procurement began making inquiries. The inquiries immediately hit a wall. And that wall was about to become a trail. In mid-January, sourcing Lilium candidum was not simply expensive. It was extraordinary. The genuine Madonna lily didn't perform well in hothouse conditions. Most commercial growers had abandoned it entirely. The few specialist suppliers who still cultivated it grew primarily for museum gardens, historic estate restorations, and a tiny exclusive market of high-end event florists. In the entire Western Hemisphere, fewer than 5 florists had the supplier relationships to source fresh Madonna lilies on short notice in January. Esteban's people reached out to one of them. Her name was Claudette Renard. She ran a boutique floral studio in Miami called Maison Blanche. No walk-in traffic, no online store, appointments only. Her clients were private estates, luxury hotels, and events that never appeared in any newspaper. Claudette was expensive, discreet, very good at what she did. And she kept meticulous records. Old-fashioned and handwritten, because she trusted paper more than software for the addresses of her most private clients. That ledger was about to become the most dangerous document in the Western Hemisphere. The man who thought differently. The Salazar network didn't find Esteban through technology. They found him through patience and a theory everyone else thought was wrong. Marco Salazar was the intelligence director of the rival Salazar cartel. He had spent 4 years developing a single argument. His peers thought it was too simple. He didn't care. A man as careful as El Jardinero has already won the digital war, he had written. You will not find him with technology. You find him through what he cannot stop being. What he cannot stop being. That phrase became the motto of Marco's small intelligence team. 6 people, a rented office in Panama City, officially market research consultants. They weren't watching for drug shipments. They weren't monitoring encrypted communications. They were watching the luxury supply chains. Rare wines, specialty foods, bespoke tailoring, exotic animals, art restoration. And flowers. Specifically, rare flowers. Marco had a fragment of intelligence from 2 years prior. Second-hand, unverified, almost nothing. El Jardinero maintained gardens of unusual quality at his properties. Strong, specific tastes in floriculture. Marco catalogued it and waited. Then, in late January, one of his analysts flagged something. A boutique Miami florist had made urgent inquiries to 2 suppliers in southern France and 1 in Tuscany. Large quantity of Lilium candidum, needed within 10 days. The quantity wasn't enormous, but it was specific, expensive, out of season. And the delivery instruction stopped her cold. The flowers were not going to a hotel, not to an event venue, not to a city address. They were going to a logistics coordinator who would manage last-mile delivery to an undisclosed location in rural coastal South Carolina. South Carolina, a state with almost no profile in cartel geography. A state nobody was watching. A state where a man could buy 600 acres of lowcountry marshland through shell companies and be largely invisible to everyone. The analyst brought the flag to Marco with caution. It might be nothing. Probably nothing. A wealthy eccentric ordering rare flowers for a winter estate. But Marco looked at the details for a long time, and suddenly something felt wrong. The timing, the specificity of the species, the security-minded indirection of the delivery chain, the rural coastal location. He made a decision: get the ledger. Acquiring Claudette Renard's physical ledger required 3 days. A low-level operation, considerably more delicate than what Marco's organization usually ran. One of his people applied for a part-time assistant position at Maison Blanche. In the 20 minutes they spent unsupervised in the back office, they photographed 30 pages. The delivery coordinate was there, handwritten in Claudette's precise cursive. A rural address outside Beaufort, South Carolina. Cross-referenced to a client name that was clearly fictitious. One of several markers Claudette used for clients who paid cash and preferred no documentation. Marco looked at the coordinate. And remember, all of this started because of one impossible order. A bouquet of rare white lilies that a grieving son refused to go without. Then he made 2 calls. One to his leadership. One to a contact inside the DEA who had been on the Salazar payroll for 6 years. What happened next moved on 2 tracks simultaneously, and it was the convergence of those tracks that made everything irreversible. The morning, everything ended. From the outside, the estate outside Beaufort looked completely legitimate. 640 acres of coastal lowland. Purchased through a real estate trust registered in Delaware. The main house, a restored antebellum structure set back half a mile from the road. Live oaks draped in Spanish moss. And at the rear, a formal garden planted and maintained with extraordinary care. Security was extensive and invisible. Perimeter sensors extending 200 meters beyond the fence. 12 guards, rotating shifts, communications on frequencies unmonitored by standard law enforcement. 3 checkpoints on the access road. Continuous drone surveillance covering a 1-mile radius. Against a conventional approach, this was impenetrable. Against what was coming, it had one catastrophic weakness. But then, nobody had planned for the flowers. The flower delivery. The climate-controlled courier van had been pre-cleared weeks in advance. Correct paperwork, vetted driver, the delivery window authorized at the highest level. The guards weren't going to flag it. They were expecting it. They were going to see a florist's van and think about the funeral happening later that morning. Marco's team had been watching the delivery logistics for 72 hours. They knew the van's route, its departure time, its arrival window. They knew exactly when the outer perimeter would open. 7:14 in the morning. The courier van reached the first checkpoint on schedule. Inside, the driver was legitimate, employed through Claudette's logistics partner, unaware of anything. He was not part of the operation. He was a coincidence that had been weaponized. Two vehicles followed at a distance, calibrated precisely to use his clearance window. As the first checkpoint raised its barrier for the van, the vehicles behind it accelerated through before it came back down. The guards at the first checkpoint were dead before they could transmit a warning. The second checkpoint fell within 40 seconds. The third within 90. A signals jammer activated simultaneously, cutting all radio communications across the estate. 8-minute window, that was all they needed. Inside the main house, Esteban Vargas Delgado was in the front room. His mother's casket had been arranged there that morning. Tall standing arrangements of white lilies placed around the room. Their scent filling the air exactly as he had wanted. 15 people stood quietly. Nobody spoke. When the sound reached them, Esteban was the first to understand what it meant. His reaction was extraordinary, the response of a man who had spent his entire adult life calibrating for worst cases. He moved toward the rear of the house, toward the secondary escape route. Before most of the people in the room had even processed what was happening. He was so close. But then it was already too late. He didn't make it. The details of the next 4 minutes have been reconstructed from physical evidence, survivor accounts, and 11 seconds of audio recovered from a guard's body camera that malfunctioned during the breach. What's known? Esteban Vargas Delgado, El Jardinero, the most invisible criminal of his generation, was neutralized in the rear corridor of his mother's funeral. Surrounded by the scent of Madonna lilies. The last room he stood in was still full of the flowers he had crossed every operational line in his history to put there. The irony was not lost on anyone who came after. The empire that died overnight. The empire did not survive the morning. This surprised people who hadn't understood something critical. His people didn't just follow Esteban because he paid well. They followed him because they believed, genuinely believed, that he was uncatchable. That alignment with him meant alignment with something that couldn't be broken. That belief was the real infrastructure. And it collapsed the moment the news left Beaufort. The news moved through the network in pieces at first. Fragments, rumors, people trying to dismiss it. By midday, undeniable. By evening, 3 of his 6 senior regional lieutenants had independently contacted law enforcement to negotiate. A 4th had vanished entirely. 2 rival networks that Esteban had frozen out for years began moving within 24 hours. Territorial conflicts ignited in 4 countries simultaneously. No central command. No unified strategy. No shared myth to hold it together. Within 72 hours, one of the most disciplined criminal empires in the world was at war with itself. Within 3 months, it had effectively ceased to exist. The DEA's formal report described the collapse as unprecedented in both speed and totality. 11 years of active investigation. Hundreds of millions of dollars in resources. The combined intelligence assets of 4 federal agencies. All of it had failed to locate him. The critical intelligence, the report noted carefully, had originated from the monitoring of specialty floral supply chains by a non-governmental actor. Marco Salazar's name did not appear in the declassified sections. The lesson that moved through law enforcement circles afterward was uncomfortable, because it ran against the direction of everything the intelligence community had been building toward. Digital surveillance, encrypted platforms, AI-assisted signals analysis. And the end of a billion-dollar empire came down to handwriting in a paper notebook and a man who couldn't let his mother's funeral be ordinary. Marco, in a rare anonymous interview, said something that the intelligence community found quietly devastating. "We spent 4 years looking for what he couldn't stop being. The digital version of him was perfect. The human version of him was the same as anyone. He loved his mother. That was the only door that was ever open." Claudette Renard closed Maison Blanche 6 months after the events in South Carolina. She had not known what she was delivering to or for whom. She had asked no questions because her clients paid her not to, and for 20 years that arrangement had worked without incident. She spoke once, anonymously, to a journalist. "When someone needs something that's specific," she said, "it usually means the thing has a meaning beyond the thing. It means it isn't really about the flower." She paused. "It means it's about something you can't replace." The formal gardens of the Beaufort estate were left untended after federal authorities seized the property. Within 2 growing seasons, most of the carefully maintained plantings had gone wild. Overtaken by coastal grasses, the slow, patient sprawl of the lowcountry. But the following spring, in one corner of the rear garden where someone had planted bulbs the previous autumn, a cluster of white lilies came up on their own. Nobody had maintained them. Nobody had planned for them. They grew anyway, pale and perfect in the South Carolina sun. Because that's what planted things do when given enough time. They bloom regardless of what happened to the person who put them there. And they don't know anything about empires.